Welcome to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you very much for joining us. And I wanted to thank up front the panelists. We will hear more about them and their organisations shortly. And one of our panelists, Kirsty, is joining us, but we're just having a few connection problems. So she will join us as we go into this intro. This is one of the series of discussions that Philanthropy Company is hosting, and we're absolutely thrilled to be able to talk about this really critical subject today around food poverty for children in the UK. And the reason that we have brought these experts together is that we see some of the incredible initiatives that have been happening in terms of funding response to child food poverty, and also in terms of the opportunity to do more in our communities and indeed across the UK. So let's just dive in. We're going to ask the speakers some questions. We're going to have some discussion. We would like you to send in your Q&A, which we will then field to the speakers later on in the session. And this is very much scratching the surface of what is an enormous issue. So I'm going to go to Mark first. Mark, it'd be terrific if you say a little bit about your organisation and also what you see as the future of food poverty in the UK. How can we still be talking about this when so many things are starting to change around us? Mark.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak today. So my name's Mark Curtin. I'm the Chief Exec of a food redistribution charity based in London called the Felix Project. And what we do is we work right across the commercial food industry, and we help them to reduce their food waste by taking the surplus food that's perfectly fit for human consumption. And we sort with a magnificent army of volunteers and staff, sort that food, and with a kind of last mile redistribution operation, we get that food redistributed out to nearly 1,000 charities, community organisations, and other organisations that are helping to fight food poverty and insecurity in London. Our work with schools and children and young people focused organisations sees us work with over 120 schools across London, primary schools, where we deliver food in term time to schools at the end of the day so that children can come to a marketplace, select food that they and their families can then take home to have in the evening, where food is not readily available to meet need. And then what we also do is work with over 70 holiday programme providers outside of school term, where we know that holiday hunger is a major issue. And we provide food and do lots of other things with other organisations to engage young people in the joy and fun of food and understanding and learning more about it, but also equally making sure that we tackle the issue of hunger and malnutrition. In terms of the outlook, if you like, and the issue of food poverty, particularly for children, we are in a place at the moment as a charity where we're obviously responding to what's happened with the pandemic over the last 12 months or so. And we're very much in the mode at the moment of looking at the next 3 years. And we've got research that suggests that in London alone, the demand for food in terms of volume, if you like, is over 120 million meals, that's including adults. But actually that there are 2 million adults and nearly 500,000 children who are at risk of food insecurity. So as an organisation, our role is to scale up as quickly as we can, to work with food partners, businesses like Tesco's, who one of your colleagues is here today to speak about, and to be able to reach as many of those children as possible with good quality, high nutritional value food that helps to overcome the challenges that they face.
Thank you very much. And Pal, you're also in the getting food to people who need it operation, aren't you? But not in London, but very much about responding to the urgent need that actually the original lockdown threw up. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about what you do and indeed what you see as the outlook, what you see as the future. Oh, I think you're on mute, Pal.
Thanks so much. My name is Pal Singh. I'm the founder and director of Building Bridges, which is based in Edinburgh. And during the pandemic, we were able to deliver halal meats, particularly to those in the ethnic minority communities, to have a very swift, rapid response, really, in terms of the need that was there. and just see that in terms of those that are coming from those particular Black, Asian and minority communities, that there was an article that was in The Guardian last July, which said that 50% of those from those households, 50% were living in poverty. And so there's those who are facing unemployment, those who are facing low income families, and those also have lost individuals and people that were somewhat breadwinners within those communities due to COVID. So there's a tremendous need there, and the pandemic has certainly hit those communities in a very hard way. And so there's a need to tackle poverty within those ethnic minority communities and households.
Thank you very much. I mean, I had the privilege of seeing a little of what you were doing through the National Emergencies Trust, and to see you and your team of volunteers just out on the streets, knocking on doors, providing food was incredible and an absolute lifeline for people. So thank you for everything you've been doing on that. David, let me come to you, because obviously you're at the other end of the distribution chain, really, and I know that you've done an enormous amount in the area of food poverty, both in terms of emergency response, but also as part of the longer term picture. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about that, and also about what you see as a slightly longer term outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caroline, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I'm David Page. I'm UK and Ireland Communications Director for Tesco. Very happy to join today. Our programs and our communications programs obviously run the gamut of probably the country's busiest press offices and communications on local, financial, and corporate comms all the way through, and the running of our community programs that fit into our little helps plan, which is our ESG summary that covers people, planet, product and places, and all of our community work sits within the places pillar. As you rightly say, I mean, we have a long history of supporting and working with communities and providing food and food redistribution. It's a hugely complex issue, child poverty, requiring collaboration across all areas to address. And obviously, we very much support the need that no child should go hungry. In fact, no one should go hungry. And our role really is very much focused on the provision and access to food directly through our shops by providing as much value as where we can, but also through supporting community partners, providing funding to local communities, supporting our charity partners where we can, and do that at scale and with proximity. On both of those, proximity, obviously we operate around the country. We're in most postcodes, we're in every constituency. We have 3,500 stores in the UK. So that gives us a very fundamental and local awareness and knowledge of the issues and ability to help and scale. Since 2015, when we set up Community Food Connection, for example, which is where we take surplus from our stores and then pass it through to Fair Share and onwards to Mark's organisation, for example, and Trust for Trust and Olio. We donated 100 million meals in that time from 2015. And the outlook probably summarised by the fact that we currently donate 2 million meals a month to those organisations and onwards to up to 6,500 charities and community groups. And that figure obviously has grown from 2015 when we set that up. But 2 million meals a month is a considerable amount of food going in to help alleviate the problem as best we can.
I mean, that's a phenomenal figure, and honestly, hats off to you, because it's although it makes sense now, now we're all more familiar with this. It makes sense to have food that's wasted otherwise now going into communities. But even a couple of years ago, this just wasn't something that I think was in place. So it's really fantastic how much you're doing. And Richard, obviously being at Barnardo's, you see both the best and worst of people, I'm sure, and you must have a more kind of macro view, I suppose, of what the issues are for children who are frankly still going hungry.
I hope so. Yeah, Richard Simpson, I'm Head of Safeguarding and Quality with Barnardo's. I'm also, I think, you've seen my biography, I'm on the management committee of the North Lakes Food Bank, which is a Trussell Trust approved food bank. Think less sort of lakes and mountains, think more coastal towns that have hit hard times like Workington, Whitehaven, Maryport up in Cumbria. We've been involved in a number of things, obviously, through the pandemic in terms of trying to help, be that encouraging service users to access the kind of initiatives that have already been talked about, some food distribution ourselves to particular families, doing a bit of campaigning around sort of food poverty and trying to support other people who've been doing campaigns too. I think a bit about the forecast. I think what bothers me about the future is, I think we'd all like to believe, isn't it, that Boris Johnson has found the magic money tree to pay for all of what we've done, and he hasn't. So there's going to be a need to pay back a lot of what has been expended, which I think will inevitably, I fear, a level of austerity to come, which actually means I think we're looking at levels of poverty and unemployment returning to a significant degree. And what I fear with that is that in itself is a tragedy, but the people who are facing poverty and unemployment may never have faced it before. It may be a new group of people who are facing that poverty and unemployment. I think the other thing I worry about a little bit about is, I think some of the wonderful initiatives we've seen, hats off to Marcus Rashford for what he's done, is I fear that some of those initiatives will fall away as we start to come out of the pandemic. The focus will shift from it at the very time that actually we need it most. And I worry a bit about that. So I'm certainly not in any way knocking those initiatives. And that's it. I think some of the kindness I've seen over the last 12 months has been awe-inspiring. But actually, I think we're in for the long haul, not just for getting through the pandemic and the immediate aftermath of the pandemic. On a personal level, it's a scandal if children aren't fed in 2021. So I think initiatives like this kind of session, yeah, we need things like this. We need to keep talking about how we're going to solve this together.
Thank you. And I think you've put that really well. I mean, the bleakest of outlooks for children who are not getting enough to eat, and yet the sort of most hopeful of outlooks when there are people like the people on this call who are really trying to make a difference, and indeed, as you say, Marcus Rashford and others. Our other panelist, Kirsty, has sort of popped in, but also now had trouble with the connection, so we will carry on, but let me give her apologies on her behalf. Thank you for setting out a broad picture. I'm now going to pass to Will, my colleague at the Philanthropy Company, to delve into that picture in a little bit more depth. Will.
Thanks, Caroline. So that was a really interesting introduction to all of those organisations that we've got here today, all the way from Scotland, London, and you can see there from the mix of people that they work with and how it all fits into this bigger, really complex picture. So we've got about half an hour now where we're going to delve into a bit more detail, and we're going to just have a conversation with Richard, Mark, David and Pal to get a sense of what's working and what more is there to do. So Pal, if I come to you first, if I may, so I'm really interested to know from your perspective, as you said, in Edinburgh and in Scotland, and as Caroline said, from our experience of working with you at the National Emergencies Trust, What would you say works from a national versus local approach, and how does that intersect with ethnic minorities, minority communities?
The key to, well, thanks ever so much for that question. It's very interesting. Just to say, on a local basis, for us to be able to respond in the way that we did, and to do that, the key to it was partnership. We were able to work with others in the community because of the connections that have been built and the social capital. I don't think we can do this on our own. It's great that we have our own strengths, but to be able to work together. So we were able to work with the Mosque Kitchen. We were able to work with other groups and agencies in the area, those who are on the ground, who said, hey, we can do out, 100, 1,000 meals a week if you like. We have the capacity to do that. So it's connecting with people like that that we found, and also with Asian Concern and Punjabi Junction, and then people out there who needed it, sort of right the way across, some of those who were working in the community itself. And then also to have volunteers, a whole army of volunteers, a partnership with them that was coming from within the community. So the partnership wasn't just with organizations, but it was grassroots. It was with individuals on the ground. So it wasn't just top down, it was a partnership together with people and saying, in your community, in your organization, we need volunteers in a sense to be able to deliver this food. And so we were able to do that 3 times a week. And I think it is, sometimes we feel that we got the ideas, we know what to do, and we have that in terms of building bridges, but we couldn't do it without bringing others together who wanted to respond in the same way. So the partnerships on that level, but also right down in terms of grassroots, the actors, those who are doing it. And I think as we move forward, it would be good to have that sort of conversation. Where are we involving, in terms of the future, those that are on the ground, and hearing from them what's most effective? How can we actually do this together? And how can we be a part of this? So I think that's where we've set up things like advisory groups, which are made from the Sudanese community, Punjabi community, from the African, Eastern European, all these people coming together and saying, this is what we need, this is how we can tackle the problem, instead of us going and saying, hey, we've got the answer. But it's something in terms of very much a asset-based approach that we're taking here in Edinburgh.
Thanks, Paul. It's really interesting, and partnership is of course really important. And I wondered, Mark, if I come to you next, if we're talking about partnerships, you've obviously got some fantastic partnerships at Felix Project. What's your approach to that question? What have you found that's worked from being a London-based organisation in this approach?
Yeah, I think I would echo a huge amount of what Paola said there. First of all, if we take on a national level, an organisation like us, because of the scale of need in a huge region, it's not just a city. London is a region where there are literally hundreds of thousands of children who find themselves either food insecure or at risk of hunger and malnutrition. The scale of food that's needed to be able to meet this unprecedented at the moment demand that we're seeing means that we have to be able to scale as an organization, and we have done, to work at a national level. So huge businesses like Tesco's and other competitors of theirs, but also we work with hundreds of businesses across the food industry, mean that we have had to grow our organization with the capacity and the capability to be able to take food from outside of London, working with the farming and production end of the food logistics chain, right the way through to hospitality, retail, manufacturing, wholesales, and just about every business, if you can imagine, that will have surplus food within it for all kinds of reasons. But then what we have to do is the craft for us as an organization is how do we then make that work at a local level? And to Paul's points, really, we rely hugely on our ability to work in partnership with local organizations, If you take a city like London or a region like London, the diversity, the cultural differences, the local differences between one postcode to the other is so vast and so different that our work with local organisations who really understand cultural differences, geographical differences, and also the needs of the people that they exist to serve themselves. I mean, the partnership is absolutely key. We pride ourselves in the way that we collaborate. We work with organisations who not only understand, and that this includes schools, youth clubs, youth organisations, and other organisations that work with the whole family, not just directly with children themselves, on our ability to be able to understand from them what the needs and demands are, but then also to be able to go to big organisations like David's and say, well, actually in London, this is what's needed. And actually, you know, in East London, the needs and demands are very, very different to South London or North London. And if you take that across the rest of the country, I think you'll find that that's the same in all the regions and all the big cities as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. David, do you want to come in next? I'd be really interested to see, you know, food redistribution, as Mark's talking about, and the food industry is obviously completely connected. It'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on what Pal and Mark have said there.
Yeah, so we almost come from a national and then go local. So it kind of it's all playing in the same space. But the initiatives that we create are some of the ideas will often come up from the shop floor. Free fruit for kids, for example, was a shop floor colleague idea that came up, and then we could work out actually how we were going to make it happen. But community food connection, bags of help, food collection, they're all central ideas that are run nationally for the benefit of national and local organisations. And what we try and do as much as possible, and there's a real focus going forward, is how can we empower our store managers, how can we empower the store directors, how can we empower our community champions, our 400 community champions, and all of our colleagues, many of whom have a real interest in trying to help. A third of a million colleagues, so there's potentially quite a lot of help there. How can we work on a local level? Because very few people deal with Tesco the corporate. We operate on high streets, and our customers and our colleagues and our partners work with us on a store-by-store basis, and that's where the help comes. That's where their relationships are, and making and helping our organisation and those in our organisation who are frontline to really understand what we're trying to do is try and make the systems work as easily as possible, take as much complexity out of our operation to enable donation to come from our stores, to enable our customers to donate through food collections, which again, national initiative but run locally, and then get that food ambient or fresh rapidly through to our partner organisations. So the two are symbiotic, national initiatives, but very much played out at a local level, working side by side and together with the partners that we have and have spend the time to develop.
No, thank you, David. So another question that we were sort of pondering for this discussion today is the impact of celebrity-led campaigns. Richard, I know you have a wide set of responses for all of the questions today, but I wondered if you would like to take that one and just give it your sense from Barnardo's or from your career today and what you've seen. You know, what's your experience of the impact of celebrity-led campaigns?
Yeah, I can do that. I just think just a bit about what works very, very quickly. I think it's interesting for me about whether we see the future as food redistribution, which is what people have talked about. I've been really struck by listening to what people just said, actually. Is that the future? Because we had a debate last night at the management group of the food bank about whether that is the future. is food distribution. But it depends, I suppose, whether you see food poverty as part of a wider structural poverty, of which the food bit is the most acute bit, because we all need food. I think, and obviously I'm not dissing those food distribution schemes, fantastic, by the way. I think the bit about celebrity for me, I think I've mentioned Marcus Rashford before. I think what he did was remarkable. Took on government as an individual himself, and created a movement which lots and lots of people bought into. So why would anybody knock that? Absolutely fantastic. And I think there'd be very few people who would disagree with him. I suppose my worry goes back to my original point, is that what happens after the pandemic when the world moves on again. And I worry that actually, I suppose, if it's just about celebrity will inevitably move on to something else. But actually, I think the problems that we are facing coming out of the pandemic, and need to remind ourselves, well, food poverty wasn't caused by the pandemic. It was made worse by the pandemic. But food poverty existed before the pandemic, and I'm afraid it will exist after the pandemic. And I say I'm not knocking celebrity, but I worry it becomes a little bit sort of almost like a cult, which happens for a while and dies. Where actually I think the problems we face are long-term and arguably structural.
Yeah, I'm wondering, what do you think, Richard? Do you think more people are talking about it now because of Marcus Rashford and because of the crisis that we saw or experienced with holiday hunger over the last year?
No doubt about it, and that's a good thing. But I worry that actually, if it becomes, well, Marcus has sorted it, therefore we don't have to worry about it, that's a worry. Because actually, we're going to get through this, and that's why I'm really taking with the food distribution schemes, is that's about us all collectively taking action, all of us doing a bit, giving our excess food, redistributing the food. We're taking collective ownership, we're not pathologizing individual families who have actually just been dealt a bad hand.
And I guess another, Marcus couldn't join us today, but obviously he has a real personal experience in how he grew up in the UK and in his personal story, which adds authenticity.
It does, but his story, isn't it? And I think we'll find there's lots of different stories, and I think it can be that actually that becomes the story, where actually if we talk to people, there's lots of routes to poverty. Unfortunately, it's not a single story with a single solution.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Mark, do you want to talk about how you work with celebrities and what's your view on this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I share a huge amount. I find myself nodding furiously there as Richard was talking. I think this is a multifaceted, quite complex area, if you like. Poverty, generally speaking, is I mean, food poverty is quite tangible. You know, Richard's right. We all need food, and I think we all understand from the profile, if you like, that was given to food poverty in the pandemic, and then helped a huge amount by the work that Marcus and others did. We were able to really understand it because we all need food, and we all understand the need for food. There are other elements of food, whether it be fuel poverty or others that are linked to socioeconomic status and so on, that people don't probably see or understand as clearly. And therefore, I think specifically on the aspect of celebrity, I take it a bit broader than that, actually. It's not just celebrity in the traditional sense that we all recognise, but it's people of note, people with high profile, people who have a platform. Marcus himself talked a lot about the fact that it wasn't that he was a Manchester United player, it was that because he was a Manchester United player, he had a platform. We've seen lots of other people with with notable VIP status in one form or the other. The work that Greta Thunberg has done in raising the issue of sustainability in the environment. I think what's really important is people taking advantage of having a platform, having a voice. Social media allows more people to do that now. Some more talented in certain things than others, and some people becoming famous because they're famous. But I think what's really important is taking that responsibility. The most impressive thing for me that celebrities in all my years I've worked in charities, and Will, you and I worked together a charity a few years ago where a number of celebrity involvements, is those that take responsibility for not only helping the charity or the organization to get the message out there, but actually, to Richard's point, which is to sustain their engagement and involvement with that. I genuinely believe that for Marcus Rashford, he will continue to do what he's been doing because it's real, because he was there. He was one of those kids. Yeah, I take Richard's point that it's about him and his individual story, and his own experience would be different to hundreds, thousands of other children. But this need for all of us to see how one person in this case takes responsibility, and to all accept that we all have a collective responsibility. David and his colleagues at Tesco's have proved, you know, that they take their professional corporate social responsibility as, you know, the, if not one of, if not the largest UK retailer for food, and what they're going to do about it. And I think that what we should take from it is how we all work collectively together as a movement of people to address, in this case, food poverty. And then I think the other thing, you know, is a bigger, wider societal issue, way beyond the means of an organisation like the Felix Project, which is poverty more generally. So I think that that's where celebrities or people of note can raise the profile of an issue, but encourage people to take responsibility for dealing with it, rather than just see something that is Marcus Rashford or Greta Thunberg or somebody else's issue that they keep talking about on social media.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And that we're going to sort of wrap up at the end where we're looking at calls to action, but there's almost one there in what you're saying, with making this a movement and getting all stakeholders involved in the longer term. David, if I could come to you next to talk a bit more about private sector giving, be really interested to get your viewpoint from Tesco's of what you do at Tesco and what you could see the wider sector being able to support with.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the role of private sector giving is huge, and in the last 2019-20, we as a business gave 80 million of corporate giving, and then everything else that kind of comes on top in terms of support to community groups and through food. So it has huge potential, and it has absolutely enormous impacts. I think there always needs to be a reason. We're a very commercial organisation. There has to be a reason for us to want to do something, and there has to be a return, and we have to be able to see both of those and explain both of those to the business. Food redistribution through CSC, particularly, for example, came to be because we wanted to reduce food waste, and we had a target that no food fit for human consumption would go to waste, and we're kind of at 80% of that target. That was what created CSC. But increasingly, the community benefit has come up to equal that. So it's about food waste minimisation, and it's about community support, child support, family support, and the return to the business it's the right thing to do. It is. And customers, it's how we operate as a business, and will continue to do so. Just on the previous point, I mean, that's why we don't put celebrity faces to these types of programs, precisely because they go broader and longer and deeper because of that. And I think for us, what we want to try and do and have the ability to do with the money and the resource that we've got is explore different ways of helping. So we've talked an awful lot about food redistribution, but we are also funding an educational program that's being run by Bite Back 2030, looking at getting perceptions of health and healthier meals through schools, to encourage peer-to-peer young people to know more about health and about healthy eating We run community cookery school. We're running our second one at the moment. So we're trying to not only alleviate the problem, but sort of look at different ways that we can help. And as a business, we can put the resource to that at scale, or at kind of seed funding and seed programs as well, which then would have potentially the ability to scale up depending on. I mean, as with all things in our business, we trial an awful lot, and if it works, then we can take it forward, and see the return that we can get and we can add.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's really, really interesting to see Tesco's viewpoint at that macro level. Pal, if I could come to you next, complete opposite almost, just talking about the grassroots. Be really, really interested to get your thoughts on how big a deal is funding for you as a grassroots organisation, and what's worked well, what's not worked well.
I think just for us as well, but also for those in those communities, in terms of funding, can be a challenge, really. And I think the thing with Foundation Scotland and the Emergencies Trust Fund that we were able to was they were so quick off the mark that we got a reply in terms of funding within, I think, 5 to 7 days. We were quick off the mark to be able to do that. And I think funders need to see the need that is there and to respond to it, but also look at some of these communities and say, how can we actually support them in this role? Because you get somebody, some of the new communities that I mentioned, say, for example, like the Sudanese community, who haven't got a clue about how to go about doing that. And it's empowering them instead of just a handout to them, but saying, you can do this, and we can come alongside you and support you to do this. And these are the steps. So we can't just keep on doing it in a sense to them, but we need to do it with them together. And I think that is the key really for us. I think the other is just to be, in a sense, culturally appropriate and sensitive that we found in how you go about doing that. So for example, even in terms of language, instead of saying, we're just giving you some food, or this is from the charity, or this is this, but in terms of honor and izzat and things that go on within that community, to say, this is just a gift that we're wanting to give you. And that brings a different stance to it altogether. And it's understanding this. And unless you've got those communities a part of it and involved in it, and I think the next challenge will be for those funders in terms of how can we support those small community, those small charities, and those who are just springing up in this role, to be able to work with those communities and then to connect with others as well and to work. So it's a partnership also with the funders and those in those communities as well. And I think just quickly, Will, I know I'm going off the point, but to the earlier question, and again, for us, I think in terms of celebrities and those that are known, again, it needs to be people that they respect and they know, instead of us just sort of coming along and saying, I mean, Marcus Rashford is great in many ways, and I'm sure he feels so, and he's done a fantastic job, but maybe not so in the Sikh community here in Edinburgh. And it needs to be somebody from within that community that they respect. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a celebrity, but somebody who's well known and who can speak into that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Pal. The last question for this part of the discussion, really, we wanted to start to address, probably only got 5 minutes left of this bit, was around government incentives. So Richard, maybe I'll come to you next. Do you have a view on whether there should be government incentives for philanthropic support to charities in this space?
A bit of me just thinks, well, why wouldn't we? But I think what I'm bothered about, I read somewhere actually recently that we're at the tipping point where it is 50-50 on whether people give to charity or not. And that to me is a really key point in our society, because actually it may come to the point where actually it is less likely that you give to charity than you do. And we should all be worried about that. Not just the charities who benefit, that the charitable giving becomes less likely, but also actually I think it says something about our society and about the fact that we collectively own these problems. So yeah, we would always hope, would we, that people would give out of the goodness of their heart. But actually, if people need a little bit of a nudge to ensure that actually philanthropy, giving, collective effort, that I'm all for it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have to really get against that tipping point. I think it's a little thing, but actually, as soon as it starts, it may deteriorate very quickly, and it becomes something we don't do anymore, and that can't be the case. This is a collective problem. Not just food poverty, but poverty as a whole is collective to me.
Yeah, it's making it not necessarily just about government support, it's about how do we incentivize giving, and how do we make sure it's everyone's responsibility.
Because government support in itself is great, but actually that makes it food poverty and poverty the sole preserver. The people affected by it, it'll always be their problem, and government. And I don't think that's a society I want to live in. I want to live in a society where it's our collective problem. I'm very proud of the Victorian philanthropists, including Thomas Barnardo. Yeah, a man after my own heart. And we need to live that legacy now.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Mark, do you want to round off any part of this discussion that you wanted to add more to, whether it's around celebrity, the national, regional, government incentives, impact of private sector giving or private individuals?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would like to come back to is Richard just talked about, and a couple of us mentioned about collective responsibility, societal collective responsibility, however you want to frame it. I think, we are really proud of the work that we do, that I mentioned at the very beginning about being collaborative. And I think we're an organisation that has shown that by working with the corporate food industry, not just the retail sector where David and colleagues come from, but right across the food industry, but also the local communities. Those are volunteer-centric organisations that help and work with. And I think Powell's point is really important. This is about working with and not doing to. And it's really important that this huge issue that affects millions, in this case, for the purposes of this debate or discussion, children, is that it will take a collective movement of change of people. And I think the way in which responsible businesses, they recognise that there's a sustainability aspect, but actually one problem very simply solves the other. I made the analogy recently that, when food, and I don't include Tesco's within this to be really clear, but when food is chucked away, which is perfectly good from human consumption, it's no different to the NHS chucking away loads of vaccines for COVID-19. Having the amount of surplus food that we have available to us, to get it sorted and redistributed, which is quite easy to do. It's not particularly difficult. We don't need to employ people from NASA to help us to work out how to do this. And then at a local community level, find how food can help organisations do much, much more than just feed people, to provide other services and engagement in community. It's quite an important collaborative approach that requires not for profit, and to a certain extent government and other similar agencies to collectively come together. So the answer to the question of what can government do is create that environment that enables all of us to work together by making things simple, straightforward, and non-complex.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. We've got one question that's popped up that I'll ask the panel and see who would like to approach this one. With the recent adoption in Scotland for a right to food approach, does the panel not think that a cash-based approach is preferable to provision of surplus food, which is a separate issue to food insecurity? Do you have a view there? Powell, are you aware of this approach and adoption in Scotland?
I'm not at the moment, but thank you for bringing it to my notice. I will look into it now. Thank you.
No problem. And Richard, Mark, David, any other final points around what we've discussed on this section, or this question around whether a cash-based approach would be interesting to consider rather than food surplus?
Can I answer that, Will? I think yes, I think giving people money allows people to have choices and freedom of their own, which I'm a huge advocate for. But I think at the moment there is a huge amount of surplus food that does go to waste, that goes to landfill, that anaerobic digestion, etc. And until such time that there is enough money and also poverty, generally speaking, has been tackled, whilst we're in crisis mode, I think that we can work with the food industry to redistribute surplus food. We can still give people the freedom as to what food they take from surplus and how they take it, prepare it, eat it, etc. But I think just giving people more money to buy more food won't resolve the issue that there's still this huge amount of surplus food in the food system that can be redistributed to them. So that's why for now, I think food redistribution, and of course I would say this, but for now, I think there is a huge place for food redistribution organisations like ourselves and Fair Share and others that David's mentioned to work together with partner organisations around the table here.
Yeah, I mean that makes absolute sense. I mean, you know, we cannot entirely match what we buy and what we sell, so there will always be surplus. That is something that is easy for us, or say easy, it's not, but it's we've made it as straightforward as possible to move that through into organisations like Mark's and into the community. That feels a very natural space for us to play a role, for us to help. Also talking with our suppliers and seeing if we can facilitate and help getting surplus food from the supply chain into our partner organisations as well. And again, if I look at as a business, that's something that we can do from an investment and a return point of view that is very different to a conversation around pure donation. One thing we do, and to bring in sort of the other point about giving and what we can do. I mean, our experience is that when we put stuff in front of our customers, they still give. When we make it as clear and disruptive as possible. So if you go into not in terms of food, but if you go into any Tesco this weekend, there's an opportunity to round up at till for Tesco Turns Pink, which supports Cancer Research UK's Race for Life. And that's right on the till, so we make it very, very obvious. When we do food collections, we've done 2 last year because of the pandemic. We're going to do 2 again this year. Gets maybe 3 million meals in over the course of the few days. We then top that up by 20%, which then goes to help the organisations, the partner organisations, to process that food, so we can help in that respect. But again, when the trolleys, when the collection points are put in front of customers, we're still finding customers give, but we need to continue to make that very easy for them.
Thanks, David. So I'll loop back to Caroline now for final remarks and calls to action.
And also an offer from somebody who's on the call. We have Thea from Crowdfunder UK on the call, and I believe over the winter they ran a collaborative campaign with hundreds of food banks around the country and raised over $1 million. You know, that is something that PAL in particular, Mark, I think, not sure if Felix Project was involved in it, but that's something that Crowdfunder are keen to talk about. And I think that that exemplifies some of the things that some of you have been saying, which is this is about, I love the way you're talking about creating a movement to address this, which I suppose is why we put this together. You know, we want to learn, we wanted to share stories. But I'm incredibly aware from listening to you all that all we've done is just scratch a tiny, tiny little surface. So thinking about the bigger picture, I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask you, what do we do now? What's the call to action? How do we make change? And before we jump into that big picture, I just want to remind everybody on the call to do let us have your comments, sign up to our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn, and also please in the comments at the end do give us some feedback on this that we can share with the panelists. And before I leap into that big question, let me also, because there's always get rushed at the end and I want to say it now, I wanted to say a huge thank you to you all, not only for joining this call, but for the incredible work that you're all doing in your individual ways. So a huge thank you from all of us who want to just try and do something to help. I also want to give apologies from Kirsty. Apparently the whole of the GLA system is down momentarily. So huge apologies from Kirsty, and we might perhaps get some comments that we can share in a blog afterwards from her. So let me then come to the big question. It's all very well to talk about it. We've touched on creating a movement, but what do we do next? What's the call to action? And I'm just wondering, Richard, I might come to you next. What do we do to tackle this?
I was thinking about my call to action. I was thinking actually I want to call to compassion rather than maybe action. So I'm slightly corrupting your question. Is that my view? Poverty is messy, and I don't believe there's a big group of deserving poor over here and a big group of undeserving poor over there. Yeah. So there'll always be some truth to that apocryphal story about Mr. and Mrs. A whose children are starving, but they've got the latest smartphone. And there may be some truth to that, but actually there's also a lot of untruth about it as well. So I don't believe, say, there's undeserving and deserving poor. There's just a lot of very hungry kids. And I think what we need to do is we need to keep talking and keep discussing and keep debating how we can help. So whether that's a movement or whether that's the kind of action that Mark and Pal are doing, that's what we need to keep doing to try and tackle poverty at its source. Now, and that may be actually that what we need to do is similar, the more than food initiatives, where we're actually encouraging social enterprise or encouraging people into employment training skills, whatever it is. But I think the most important bit for me is, in the meantime, let's have a bit of compassion for people who've been dealt a bad hand. It's not their action, and stop pathologizing poor people who are trying to feed their children. That's my plea.
Oh, thank you. That's very heartfelt and well said. David, what would be your, what can we do differently? What can we do going forward?
Well, I mean, I think our sort of call to action is for us is to continue working in this area. Continue to frankly lead as the retailer in this space. We want to continue working with our partners, learning from our partners, talking with them, responding to what they need from us in order for them to be able to work better, work as effectively as they possibly can. I think we can talk about it. We can play a role. Very visible. I talked about the proximity. I talked about stores on every high street. So we can. We often and haven't talked about this sort of visibly publicly a huge amount. So I think we can talk about some of the programs that we're doing and the impacts that has, and the people and the children that it benefits. To keep it very much on the wider people's kind of radar, and work to address as the movement. So sort of the alleviation. What can we do? What can we do to both address the issue, but also look to the future and address some of the root causes and tackle that. So we play a huge role in direct help of alleviation, but actually focusing on the solutions, which are even harder and more complex, is something that we can continue to play a role in.
Thank you. And Paul, I mean, you've talked very eloquently about mobilizing communities, helping communities to help themselves and so on. But just briefly, if I may, what would you see as the next steps? What do we need to do?
I think I agree with all that's been said so far, and what Richard was saying about compassion, which is so important, but also to restore dignity. I think in our communities, for people to feel that they are honoured and restored and given dignity in what we do. And they feel that they are empowered to be able to help others as well. It's not just us helping or working together, so that they can also do the same. Mother Teresa was once asked in Calcutta, somebody said to her, you know, there are thousands and thousands of hungry children in poverty. You see them on the streets everywhere, in the homes. How are you going to feed everybody? And we could say the same in our towns and cities, in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Carlisle, here in Edinburgh, Glasgow. How are we going to do it? And she simply said, one by one, one by one. And I think it's one family at a time, one household at a time, one community at a time, one town at a time, one city at a time, and one nation at a time.
Brilliant. Now, rather than you have the last word from my dog, who is responding to things outside, Mark, last word from you about the future and what we need to do next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Difficult to follow that because I think those are all fantastic points that I fully agree with. I think there's a couple of quick things I would like to say in terms of calls to action and next steps. Firstly, if you work within or have investments in or the food industry, see what Tesco's and other organisations like them have done and be inspired and take the same responsibility. There is enough food in this country for everybody. If you take account of all of the surplus food that we have across the whole food system. 70% of food waste happens in the home. So please take a lead from David Attenborough said recently, live your life, but be mindful and don't be wasteful. And I think find ways, there are so many ways to have food redistributed or given back and so on. So I think on the food side of things, I encourage food businesses, not David, because I'm preaching to the converted here, but others, to continue to work with us and to work with organisations like my own and Powell's and even Richard's and help to make sure that food isn't wasted. It's such a shame, given there is so much hunger and malnutrition. But I think on the other side of things, to kind of echo what Powell was saying recently, I ask everybody, go and have a look at an organisation in Hackney called Rise 365. A group of young teenagers, a group of young people have got together and they distribute all the food we get to them out to their communities across the housing estates in the areas that they live. We should be equally, if not even more, inspired by the young people and the resilience and determination and ingenuity, creativity that they have, so that we work collaboratively with them. And we're not here to be saviors. People don't need saving. They just need empowering an opportunity to work with them, and that's where this collective approach to do things together will enable us to overcome all these challenges that we're talking about today.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, and huge thank you to the panelists. I feel inspired and challenged and like I want to do something with these next ideas. And a huge thank you for sharing your expertise and just giving us a little snapshot into some of the challenges. And huge thank you to all of you who joined us today. Really interested to hear your comments. Please do send them through. So Paul, Mark, Richard, David, and my co-chair Will, thank you very much indeed. Goodbye. James, are we off air?